Good day, I am Anami Briones and I will be discussing the overview and professional responsibilities in the practice of civil engineering. So, this presentation addresses the procurement of civil engineering services for a quality project. So, when we say quality, it is the totality of the features and characteristics of a product or service that bear on its ability to satisfy given needs. So, in the field of civil engineering, quality is one satisfactorily meeting both the expectations of the client or employer and the requirements of the project. So, for example, I am the client and I wish to have a fully furnished home with a modern and minimalist style with an open concept, and it should be painted white with an accent of wood and black, and the construction shall only take place in a span of 1 month. So that is my requirements or expectations to that project. So the time has come for me to move in. However, dun pa lang sa exterior, nakita ko na the color that I wanted did not match to the outcome of that house. And the plan to have an open concept is hindi nasunod. No? So, we can say that that scenario or that project is not a quality project because it does not meet my expectations and requirements, no? And another definition of quality is it results from team effort and is measured by the degree of satisfaction of all parties involved, no? So, hindi lang dapat yung gumawa ng project, yung satisfied doon sa project. Dapat yung nagpagawa din ng project. We are now down to the professional responsibilities of a civil engineer. What are our professional responsibilities in the near future? Number 1, civil engineers shall conduct themselves in a highly professional manner and serve as faithful trustees or agents of their clients or employers. So for example, in every project, there's an involved money or fund for that specific project, no? And we civil engineers must be transparent on how we spend that money. Kasi unang-una, hindi yan sa atin at itiniwala lang yan sa atin ng kliyente. Number 2, not only did they entrusted us their money but the realization of their dreams, no? The whole process of turning their dreams into reality and turning their visions into reality. Number 2, civil engineers are therefore bound by the fundamental canons of ethics stated in this manual. So civil engineers shall act or behave in accordance to the fundamental canons of ethics stated in the Code of Ethics of the Civil Engineering Profession. Number 3, care and protection of the environment is more important than anything else in the civil engineer's work engagement. So, civil engineering works such as bridge, structures, houses, roads, must be a solution, not a cause for catastrophes to happen. No? Yung pag-alaga sa environment must be the sole consideration or priority of the civil engineer. Number 4, civil engineers must always strive to maintain the highest standard of ethical professional practice in their dealing with client, employers, employees, competitors, and the community. No? So, to maintain that highest ethical professional practice, the highest standard, no? Hindi lang dapat isa yung gumagalaw in that whole population of civil engineering. No, it is a collaborative work so as not to stain the civil engineering profession's reputation. So dapat lahat gumagalaw, lahat nagsistrive to maintain that highest standard.
Client and civil engineer relationship. Many engineering works are conceived, designed, and constructed through the efforts of civil engineers employed in governmental agencies or in industry. Civil engineers may be a government employee or part of a private company or construction firm. Other engineering projects come to fruition through the efforts of civil engineering firms engaged for a specific project or program by public agencies or private clients. Many public and private entities of necessity rely on civil engineers as their employees. Independent civil engineering firms are also relied upon to accomplish projects which require special expertise beyond the normal capabilities of the client. Basically, the success of any engineering project often revolves around the quality of the relationship between the client or clients and the service provider, which is the civil engineers. Creating a harmonious and proper relationship increases the customer satisfaction and loyalty since the overall service experience is more effectively coordinated. In order to achieve this harmonious relationship, both civil engineers and clients have obligations to fulfill. Let's start with the obligation of civil engineers. First, the civil engineer shall perform scope of the services as stated in Section 2. In Section 2, it says that engineers shall perform services only in the areas of their competence. A civil engineer must only accept and perform services for which he or she is qualified or has experience. This also includes signing and sealing plans or documents only with the subject matter for which he or she is qualified and has authority. Second, the civil engineer shall exercise reasonable skill, care, and diligence in the performance of his obligations. As a civil engineer, it is implied duty to use a level of reasonable skill, care, and diligence to be expected of an experienced member of the profession. But it does not necessarily require him or her to possess the highest skill or achieve the greatest result as long as he or she has exercised the requisite level of service. Third, the civil engineer shall act independently and, as required by the contract, perform with necessary skills and professional judgment. When required to certify, decide, or exercise discretion between the client and a third party with whom the client has a contract. When making judgments, especially when other people are involved, civil engineers must be discreet to avoid causing offense or revealing private information. They should also use their knowledge and experience to make the right decisions. Fourth, the civil engineer is authorized to act as the client's faithful agent when required but only as implied in Section 2 or implied in the contract adopted for the project. This means that a civil engineer is allowed to act in accordance with the demands of the client. However, only when the demand is applicable to Section 2 or within the agreements and conditions of the contract. Fifth, when aware of any matters which will change or has changed the scope of the services, the civil engineer shall give written notice to the client containing particulars of the change. The client should always be informed of the changes and specifics of the scope of services that the civil engineer will provide. Sixth, for specified stage services, the civil engineer shall not initiate or proceed with any subsequent stage of the services without the approval of the client. As the service provider, no action or service is to be carried out without the go signal coming from the client. Seventh, when required, the civil engineer shall direct and cooperate with all the other professionals and integrate their work where applicable into that being undertaken by the civil engineer and other professionals, but shall not be professionally liable for their work. It's not unusual for civil engineers to work with other professionals. However, he or she is under no obligation to their work and must concentrate solely on his or her part on the project. 8. The civil engineer may recommend specialist suppliers and/or contractors to design and execute certain parts of the works, in which case the civil engineer shall coordinate the design of such part or parts with the overall design of the works, but he shall be relieved of all responsibility for the design, manufacture, installation, and performance of any such part or parts of the works. The civil engineer shall not be liable for acts of negligence, default, or omission by such person or persons. When problems arise in parts of the project where the civil engineer coordinated with other people, he or she is not liable for it. The civil engineer is not responsible for their misconduct and negligence of duty. And lastly, the civil engineer shall notify the client of any interest the civil engineer has, which may significantly conflict with the interest of the client under their contract. Since civil engineers have knowledge and expertise in the field, it's only common for them to have greater ideas and improvements for the project. However, they have no authority to implement it without the approval of the client. It may be of interest to the civil engineer but not for his or her client. So, to avoid conflicts, civil engineers must inform their client before doing anything. And since it's a client service provider relationship, of course, the civil engineer is not the only one who have obligations. The clients also have a duty to fulfill. And for the first obligation of the client, first, the client shall pay the civil engineer for his services the amount of fees and expenses set out in or determined in their agreement. Obviously, the client needs to pay for the services of the civil engineer, and the amount is determined during the contract phase. Second, the client shall provide the civil engineer within reasonable time all the information required by the civil engineer in the performance of his services and a decision in writing on all matters properly referred to the client in writing. So before starting the project or the construction, the client needs to provide all the necessary information that the civil engineer needs. And not having enough information may result in delay to the provision of the services. Third, the client shall cooperate with the civil engineer and shall not interfere with or obstruct the proper performance of the services. Civil engineers are professionals who have knowledge and expertise in the construction field. So as a client, do not interfere during the work because the civil engineers know what they are doing. Just trust them, observe, and wait for the reports from the civil engineer. Next, the client shall, as soon as practicable, make arrangements to enable a civil engineer to enter the site and inspect facilities needed in the performance of his services. Since the civil engineer needs to inspect the construction site from time to time, he or she should be allowed to enter the site without a problem, especially if the construction is in a private property. Fifth, the client shall arrange the provision of services from other professionals or others as may be required and bear all costs. A construction or a project does not only need a civil engineer, but also other professionals. And that being said, the client must arrange the provision of other services and bear the costs. Sixth, when the civil engineer is required to administer the work of other professionals or other third parties who are directly contracted by the client, or when the civil engineer is required to act as engineer to the contract for any contract on behalf of the client, then all instructions by the client shall be given through the civil engineer. Since the civil engineer supervises and monitors the project, the client should give all instructions to him or her. And just in case problem appears, the civil engineer will take action on behalf of the client. Lastly, when aware of any matter which will change or has changed the scope of the civil engineer services, the client shall notify in writing within 7 days the civil engineer containing as far as practicable the particulars of the change. If a matter changes or will change the scope of services that the client needs from the civil engineer, then the client must notify the civil engineer as soon as possible of the change and the specifics. This because the civil engineer needs time to plan things out, and this also to avoid delay in the provision of the services.
I will be discussing the topic 3 of the practice of civil engineering. Topic 3 consists of first, the liability of the civil engineer and the client. Second, suspension or termination of services. Third is the settlement of disputes. And lastly, the ownership of data, designs, and documents. Each of us owes a duty of reasonable care to prospective parties, those persons who are likely to be affected by our conduct in a particular scenario, and each of us must act as a reasonable person under similar circumstances. The civil engineer shall only be liable to pay damages to the client arising out of or in connection with their agreement if a breach of duty of care is established against the civil engineer. And client shall only be liable to pay damages to the civil engineer if a breach of the client's duty to the civil engineer is established against the client. The civil engineer shall have no responsibility or liability for cost, loss, or damage whatsoever nature arising from any errors or omission from data, documents, plans, designs, or specifications not prepared by the civil engineer or other personnel under the direct control of the civil engineer. Notwithstanding any recommendation or lack of recommendation made by the civil engineer to the client, the civil engineer shall not be held to have made any warranty or promise as to suitability, competence, or performance of any other consultant, contractor, supplier, or other third party. The civil engineer shall not be responsible for the techniques, method, programs, sequences, or procedures adopted by any contractor or other third party responsible for executing any aspects of the project, nor for their performance on time, their failure to carry out the work in accordance with any contract documents, or for any other acts or omissions. Damages payable shall be limited to the amount of reasonably foreseeable loss and damage suffered as a result of such breach. The maximum amount of damages payable in respect of liability, whether under the law or contract or otherwise, is limited to the amount specified in the specific provision, or, if no such amount or provision is specified, to the lesser of 300,000 pesos or 10% of the total amount of damages of the portion of the work attributable to the civil engineer's breach of duty, or 25% of the total of fees payable under their agreement. If found to be liable in circumstances where the acts or omissions of a third party have contributed to the loss or damage, the proportion of damages payable by the party found liable shall be limited to the proportion which is attributable to the party's breach of duty, whether the claims are made under contract or otherwise. If circumstances arise for which the civil engineer is not responsible and which make it impractical or impossible for the civil engineer to perform in whole or in part the services in accordance with their agreement, then the civil engineer shall promptly notify the client, and the client may suspend all or part of the services or terminate the agreement by written notice of not less than 30 days to the civil engineer, who shall immediately make arrangements to stop the services and minimize further expenditure. The civil engineer, by written notice of no less than 30 days, may terminate the agreement or at his and or her discretion without prejudice to the right to terminate, suspend the performance of the whole or part or the services under the following conditions. 1. When 30 days after the due date or payment of any amount, the civil engineer has not received payment of that part of it which has not by the time contested in writing, or when services have been suspended for a period exceeding 6 calendar months, or if it is clear to the civil engineer that it will be impossible or impractical to resume the suspended services before the period of suspension has exceeded 6 months. If a dispute arises on either party, then that party shall by notice in writing serve on the other party of the details of the dispute and request the dispute be resolved by conciliation. And if the matter in dispute is not resolved in conciliation between the parties within the prescribed time, then the matter in dispute shall be referred to arbitration. The design analysis, drawings, specifications, and reproductions thereof are instruments of service owned by the professional engineer and shall be used only for the specific project covered by the agreement between the client and the engineer. This means that, to the fullest extent permitted by law, the documents prepared by the design professional, regardless of form, shall remain the property of the design professional. The design professional shall retain all common law and other reserved rights, including, without limitation, the copyrights thereto.
Hello everyone, I'm Russell Blantz and I'm going to discuss my topic about civil engineering services. So when we say engineering services, it means any service or creative work or the adequate performance of which requires engineering education, training experience in the application of special knowledge of mathematical, physical, engineering sciences to such services or creative work as consultation, investigation, evaluation, planning and design of engineering works and systems, engineering studies and review of construction for the purpose of assuring substantial compliance with drawings and specifications. Engineering services does not include responsibility for the superintendence of construction, site conditions, operations, equipment, personnel, or the maintenance of safety in the workplace. So, here are the services included in civil engineering: design, consultations and advice, feasibility studies, field investigations and engineering data collection, environmental assessments, impact statements or engineering reports, opinions of probable construction cost, preliminary and final designs, drawings, specifications, and construction bidding documents, assistance in securing construction bids and in awarding contracts, construction administration and observation, arrangements for or performance of testing of materials and equipment, assistance in startup, assessment of capacity and operation of facilities, preparation of operation and maintenance manuals, appraisals and rate studies, value engineering, expert testimony, assessments of risks, structural remediation or rehabilitation, provision of supplemental temporary staff, and last is teaching. Talents of various disciplines of professional civil engineering firms: economists, planners, engineers and designers, estimators, architects, scientists, technical analysts, specification writers, drafters, field representatives, and the last is surveyors. Program management. So when we say program management, it is the management of a group of related projects in a coordinated manner to obtain benefits not available from managing them individually. Program management is also the process of managing programs mapped to business objectives that improve organizational performance, and the program managers oversee and coordinate the various projects and other strategic initiatives throughout an organization. Program manager performs a specialized task necessary to the development or construction of a specific project. The program manager also develop, define and oversee the program, prepare budgetary estimates of program costs, prepare program schedules, evaluate and select members of the program team, and provide periodic program status reports.
Good day. I'm Mark Gian RJG on the floor. I'm here to discuss the specialization in civil engineering. PICE, Philippine Institute of Civil Engineer. It recognized the initial 5 areas of specialization. Award certificate that will consider qualification for position in the respective area of specialization. Specialization of civil engineers and civil engineers firm. 1. Structural and foundation. Structural engineers need to ensure that buildings or other structures can support their own weight as well as the weight of those who will be using them. 2. Geotechnical and environmental. The stability of the soil and rock on which a project is built, as well as the chemical composition, are the main consideration of the geotechnical engineering specialty. while environmental engineering specialty focuses specifically on creating projects that sustain or improve the environment in which they exist. Number 3. Water resources and hydraulics. Having a safe, adequate drinking water may be taken for granted in the industrialized nation of the world, but developing and developed nations alike need water resources engineered to build the infrastructure to provide clean water to those who depends on it for their survival. 4. Transportation. Transportation engineers build systems like railways, subways, road and bridges that are used to people in traveling to work, home, or vacation, among other destinations. Number 5. Construction management and engineer. This civil engineer oversee building project from start to finish, coordinating all the different professionals involved in such a project, including architects, electricians, plumbers, and financiers. Much of construction management involves keeping risk to a minimum by focusing in safety and compliance with local, state, and federal building codes. Selection of a civil engineer. Engagement of a civil engineer. One of the most important decisions to make during the development of an engineer project. Cost of the full range engineering service. Not less than 1 to 2% of the life cycle cost of most construction projects. Continuity service aids in developing relationship between the civil engineer and the client. The critical importance of the selection of civil engineer as a consultant. 1. Qualifications. 2. Experience. 3. Reputation. 4. Quality of client service.
Good day, future civil engineers. My name is Maridel G. Berioso. I am the last reporter for Group 1. I will be tackling about the topics on prime professional practice, employment, design competition, contingency basis of employment, and lastly, the professional practice of foreign civil engineers. Prime professional practice. Guidelines in this manual refer specifically to the engagement of engineering services where consulting civil engineers serves as the prime professionals and the client serves as the owner of the project, while sub-consultant is when civil engineers serves the client indirectly through another engineer or architect. The National Society of Professional Engineers adopts the following principles. On projects for the design of buildings, it is the prerogative of the client to select and designate the prime professional who may be either an engineer or an architect. The professional so retained for the project should perform only those services for which he or she is competent and should utilize the services of other qualified professionals as required to provide a proper and complete professional service to the client consistent with applicable law. Employment. After our graduation and completing the 4 years of civil engineering course, a lot of employment opportunities awaits us. As provided by the Manual of Professional Practice for Civil Engineers, employment refers to civil engineers employed by the professional consulting firms, government agencies, educational institutions, construction firms, manufacturing and commercial entities, and other entities. Design competition, a process through which a civil engineer is selected above other competitors based on proposal or innovative approach to solving a client's needs. When pursuing a new client, it's imperative that we clearly outline expectations and showcase our company's eligibility for the job. An effectively written bid proposal can clarify a variety of key details at the very beginning of a client relationship, establish our company's expertise, and increase our company's chances of being hired for the project. As future civil engineers, we will be making bid proposals for certain projects, which should not only focus on gaining profits, but as well as making sure that the project cost proposal we submitted are in favor both to our side and as well as the clients. What do I mean by this? If we make our bid proposal too high, we might not be able to win the project to the point of losing the project to our competitor. However, if we estimate it too low, a possibility of deficit or loss at the end of the project is to be expected. Contingency basis of employment. Canon 5C or PIE's Code of Ethics provides that engineers may request, propose, or accept professional commissions on a contingency basis only under circumstances in which their professional judgment would not be compromised. With this in mind, an examination of how the engineers concerned performed under the previous Code of Ethics begins with an examination of what forms of contingency fees are most likely to obstruct an engineer's dedication to safety, honesty, and integrity. A payment based on attaining a specified engineering conclusion, such as the completion of a successful feasibility study or quality control report, is a clear example of a compromising fee structure. Similarly, a contingency fee may be unethical if it rewards or penalizes an engineer depending on the outcome of the engineer's professional judgment, such as an engineer examining storm damage claims who earns a percentage of the insurer's savings from denied or reduced claims. However, if a question such as would the member's acceptance of a contract with payment amounts contingent upon the date of completion for project milestone violate the Code of Ethics, a useful piece of advice would be to point out that contingency payments are not prohibited by the present Code of Ethics. Instead, civil engineers would be asked to assess his or her own level of comfort with the payment terms. If the engineer was sure that the pricing structure would not impair his capacity to provide services with honesty and professionalism, he might proceed ethically. If, on the other hand, he believes that the agreement will put an excessive amount of pressure on his performance, he should decline the arrangement. Professional practice of foreign civil engineers. Foreign civil engineers are allowed by law or by the Republic Act 8981 to practice civil engineering in the Philippines under the following instances. First, the laws of the foreigner's state or country allow the citizens of the Philippines to practice civil engineering on the same basis and grant the same privileges as those enjoyed by the citizens of such foreign state. Second, allowed under international agreement. Third, consultants to be engaged in foreign-funded, joint venture, or foreign-assisted projects of the government. Fourth, employees of the Philippines or foreign private institutions pursuant to the law. And lastly, civil engineers who were former citizens of the Philippines who had been registered and issued a certificate of registration and a professional identification card prior to their naturalization as foreign citizens, and who, while in the country on a visit, sojourn or permanent residence, desire to practice their profession.